Welcome to our Monday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm continuing my teaching on how to find, follow, and fulfill God's will. This is the beginning of my 6th week, and this is also going to be my last week of teaching on that. I've been offering this book, How to Find, Follow, and Fulfill God's Will. This was actually 3 separate teachings that I've combined into one because you really can't just find God's will. You have to learn how to follow, and then fulfilling is absolutely important. So this is what we've been offering for 6 weeks. This is the beginning of my 6th week, and this coming Friday will be my last day. So I encourage you to please get these materials. You know, I've said things that I just think it's powerful. This is one of the things that has revolutionized my life, is finding God's will, learning how to follow Him, and now I'm working on finishing what God has told me to do. And these things that I've been sharing with you are just life-changing. I know that this would help you, so please go to the effort of getting these materials. You know, if you don't want to buy them, you can go to our website and you can actually download all of this stuff free. It's not that we're after the money. We're just wanting to get these truths out. I believe that this is what God has called me to do, is to share these truths with you. And it will really make a difference. You know, endurance is a big thing in fulfilling God's will. Lots of people start well, but they just run out of steam. They don't have the ability to finish well. And let me share this scripture with you out of Isaiah chapter 40 and beginning with verse 28. It says, "Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the Creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. There is no searching of His understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might He increaseth strength." The reason I'm reading these verses is just to make the point that the Lord is limitless in His strength, in His endurance, in His ability. And this is what He's saying. And He says He gives this power, this supernatural endurance to people. It comes from God. You can't just look to yourself. You can't just do this through your own strength and own power. And I think that this is where a lot of people make a mistake, especially those who are, you know, really motivated and very talented and high achievers and things like this. Many times those people think, I can just do this if I'll try a little bit harder. But really, for you to last and endure to the end and cross the finish line a winner, I don't believe that that is in our human strength and ability to do that. Life is going to literally knock the stuffings out of you sometime or another. And unless you are plugged into the Lord and tapped into His strength and His ability, then I believe that all of us are going to fail. All of us will stop short of seeing God's perfect will fulfilled in our life. It goes on to say in verse 30, it says, "Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young man shall utterly fail." In other words, this is talking about the youth, those that are at their peak, the very top of their performance. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how talented you are, how motivated you are, anything. Everybody, sooner or later, is going to fail. You know, one of the things that was a blessing in my life, I didn't really recognize it at the time, but when I was in Childress, Texas, I had very few people coming, and I just didn't have a lot of places to minister, so I started going into nursing homes. Nursing homes would let anybody in to minister, so I went in, and I saw people that at one time were the movers and the shakers of their community. They were popular, they were beautiful people, they had money, they were influential, they were all of these things, and yet at the end of their life, they were struggling, and many of them had been totally abandoned. There was not a single person that came to see them, and they would sit there and just cry. And I'd go in and talk to them, and they'd tell me about their glory days and how they used to be somebody important and how people used to really like them. And it helped me because it gave me a perspective that even, you know, if I feel like I'm just doing great and everything's awesome, unless the Lord comes back during my lifetime, someday I am going to get older. And even though I'm believing for good health and a healthy mind and all of these kind of things, I am not going to be at the peak. I'm not going to be at the top of my game forever. And it just really imprinted it upon me that, you know what, you have to draw on the Lord's strength. Sooner or later, you are going to come up against things that you can't handle. And if you turn to the Lord, it says, "Even the youth shall faint, But in verse 31, but they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. So this is talking about waiting on the Lord. And the wait here, this isn't talking about like you wait on a bus or you wait on somebody to come see you and you're impatient and you're just sitting there waiting. You're doing nothing and just waiting on them. No, this is talking about like a waiter or a waitress. If you're a good waiter or waitress, you will watch your customer, and if their glass gets empty, you're over there to fill it up. If they look and if they're wanting you to bring the ticket or if they need something else, you are just constantly focused on them. You're serving them. You are attentive unto them. This is what this is talking about. Waiting on the Lord, just being focused on God. And if we keep our attention on the Lord, and if we keep our relationship with God vibrant and alive, I believe that He just supernaturally infuses us. You know, I have talked to many of my old friends that I knew back 30, 40 years ago, and people that are in the ministry, and I have talked to them, and they just got tired, and they go through periods where they're burnt out and nothing works, and then they get back up and then they're down, and they just struggle to maintain a consistency. And, you know, decades after we used to be really close, I come back across these people's paths, and they're just shocked that I am still growing and that I'm still doing good and that I've never gone through great periods of depression and failure and stuff like that. And don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I've been tempted. I've had lots of bad things happen. I've had things that could have made me just, you know, fold like a $2 suitcase. And so I'm not saying that everything's been perfect, but I'm saying that God has infused me with strength, and I've been able to just go from glory to glory, and I feel like the best is yet to come, that I'm still green and growing, that things are working. I've never in the last 47 years had to go through depression. Even though I've had lots of depressing things happen to me, I've been able to go through it. And a lot of my old friends that I've reconnected with are just shocked. How do you do this? And I sit there and wonder, how do you do it any other way? You know what? If you keep your relationship with God, that's what this is talking about. When you wait upon the Lord, you renew your strength. You mount up with wings as eagles. You run and you aren't weary. You walk and you aren't faint. None of those things are normal. It is normal when you run, you get weary. It's normal when you walk that you faint. But if you are waiting upon the Lord, if you are still in a close communion with Him, God just infuses you with His strength. And again, all of this ties together. He says, haven't you heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the Creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary? There is no searching of His understanding. God doesn't get tired. And if you are plugged into God, you won't get tired. God will supernaturally enable you. So we're talking about how to fulfill, not how to just find and then start, but how to fulfill God's will for your life. And one of the ways you do it is you've got to have this vibrant relationship with the Lord where you're just plugged into Him, and God will keep you encouraged. You know, I know that this is really simple. This is so simple, you got to have somebody to help you to misunderstand what I'm saying. But did you know what? The average person doesn't do this. The average person gets occupied with life, with raising a family, going to work, all of the things that we do, and we give less and less and less time to our relationship with the Lord, especially if you're doing well. Most people only seek the Lord if their back is up against the wall, but if everything is going well, people tend to get away from their relationship with the Lord and say, it's so good, I just am not in need. You know, I can sit here and take off, goof off, not seek the Lord. The moment you do that, you are headed for a crisis. I've used this example before, but it's like flying in an airplane. And you can get real smug and thinking, look what I'm doing. I'm flying 600 miles an hour, 36,000 feet. Look what I am doing. You aren't flying. It's that plane that's flying, and it's your position and relationship to that plane that's allowing you to do what you're doing. And the moment you step outside of that plane, you may be at 36,000 feet, but you are eventually going to hit the ground. I can guarantee you. You are not going to continue. It is being in that plane that allows you to do this. It's being in Christ and having our relationship with the Lord and our dependence upon Him that gives you strength. And even if things are going good, you step outside of Christ and get back into yourself and get to glorying in your accomplishments and thinking, man, I've done so good, I don't need to spend as much time praying, seeking the Lord, studying the Word, everything's good. The moment you step outside of Christ, it's like stepping outside of that plane. And if you're at 36,000, it may be a few minutes before you hit the ground, but the moment you step outside, you are on your way down. The moment you quit depending upon God, you are headed for a crash. And this is one reason people do go up and down like a yo-yo, is because things go good, they quit seeking the Lord, and man, they fall. And then when things crash, oh God, and they go back to seeking the Lord, and then here you go, and then you go through the same thing. If we would just get to where we are dependent upon the Lord, this is the number one thing that grants you endurance, is just your personal relationship with God. In our Bible college, we teach all kinds of things, but we teach on these kind of things, and we tell people that it's good to finish, not just start well, but finish well. And I constantly am making this point that the number one thing is just your personal relationship with the Lord. I'll have questions come to me. How is it that you've been able to seek the Lord 47 years and that things are working and that you've still got the same wife and you haven't, had a moral failure, stealing money or doing something? And they ask these kind of questions. And I honestly don't have a formula. It's just my personal relationship with the Lord. If I stay in tune with the Lord, if I keep my mind stayed on Him, He'll begin to show me when I get off track. It becomes habit forming. It says that the household of Stephanus have addicted themselves to the ministry of the saints. And once you establish this pattern of seeking the Lord and fellowshipping with Him and dwelling in His peace and walking in love, did you know it becomes habit forming? It really does. You can get to where that having peace is actually better than all of the turmoil that comes when people get out here and start doing their own thing. Having joy is better than all of the depression that you get when you do things your own way. And you can get to where you become addicted to it, and you just literally can't go very long without talking to the Lord, fellowshipping with Him, and it makes a difference in your life. And that's really, I don't have a silver bullet. I don't have a magic formula. There's not step 1 through 3 that you do. It's just loving God. He is the one that never gets weary. He's the one that never faints. And when I'm plugged into Him and waiting on Him, attentive to Him and searching Him, God encourages me and God builds me up. And I really believe that this is how you fulfill God's will for your life. I gave a statistic last week that I've never been able to verify, but I heard a minister say that 80% of all ministers quit within 5 years of going into the ministry. And then out of the 20% that remain, 80% of those are burned out, ready to quit. And it is my opinion that the reason that this burnout comes, the frustration, and when things get so hard, it's because we haven't been in communion with the Lord. Because again, I go back to these verses. The Lord doesn't get weary. He doesn't faint. There is no searching of His understanding. And when you wait upon the Lord, He will renew your strength. You can draw on that. So let me say it this way, that a person who is depleted, a person who has just given all that they can give, they're burnt out, they're ready to quit. Not just ministers, but anybody. If you're working a job, if you're struggling with your family, raising your kids, and it seems like you have just gone as far as you can go and you're ready to quit, it's because you haven't been in close communion with the Lord, because God would infuse you with His strength. He would give you a supernatural endurance that allows you to stand and to endure. That's my testimony. I've been through things that, I look back and I didn't do everything the way it should have been done. When I started in ministry, I was under a wrong conception that if I was called to the ministry that I actually was unbelief or sin on my part if I went out and worked a job. I had to be full-time in the ministry, and because of that, Jamie and I struggled for at least 10 years financially. We went through terrible times. We had things happen that people shouldn't go through. And I've been through some hard times, primarily of my own making, because I didn't understand and follow the Lord properly. But anyway, I look back at those things and I see other people going through similar things like that. And it just makes me wonder, how did I ever stick with the Lord? How did I keep from being discouraged, quitting, and giving up some of the things that I've been through? I see other people go through things that weren't as bad as what I went through. You know, I recently had a lot of our ministers, Bible college directors, we had a meeting together, and some of them were talking about their hardships and the problems that they were facing. And they were problems. I'm not saying that they weren't problems, but compared to some of the stuff that I went through, they were minimal. They were nothing. They have 1,000 times more help and support than what Jamie and I had when we started out. And yet here they are fighting discouragement, and it just made me look back and wonder, how in the world did I make it? How did I survive some of those things? If you were to show me somebody else coming through those things nowadays, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see people just quit and give up. And you know, the only answer that I've got is that, man, I was tenacious about just seeking the Lord, loving the Lord, staying plugged into the Lord. And just like these verses say, He doesn't get weary, He doesn't faint, and if you wait on Him, He will renew your strength. And God was just constantly infusing me with His strength. It's not because I knew enough, it's not because I did everything right, it's not because I had support people around me that were a safety net that I could fall back on. I mean, it was just my personal relationship with the Lord. And you know, here I am 47 years later, after the Lord touched my life and changed my life, and it's still the same formula. That's really all I've got, is just keeping my eyes upon Jesus, the author and the finisher of my faith. Let me turn over and read this passage out of Hebrews chapter 12. In verse 1, "Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider Him that endured such contradiction of sinners against Himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds." You know, this is what I've been talking about all day long. How do you fulfill? How do you cross the finish line? How do you endure? How do you keep from running and not being weary? How do you keep from walking without fainting? You consider the author and the finisher of our faith, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. As long as your eyes are focused upon the Lord, as long as your attention is stayed upon Him, God will supernaturally infuse you with His power and give you the ability to last. It's like in the 14th chapter of the book of Matthew, where Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water to go to Jesus. And as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked on top of the water. But when he took his eyes off of Jesus, and he wasn't looking at pornography, he wasn't totally in rejection, he wasn't into X-rated, R-rated stuff, he just took his eyes off of Jesus and got to looking at the natural surroundings. And I tell you, you can't walk on water and think naturally. You got to think supernaturally. You got to have your attention focused on Jesus, the author and the finisher of your faith. Likewise, you may not be a person who's rejected or renounced the Lord. You know, if you're watching this program, it's the very fact that you've got a desire, you're wanting to hear, you're wanting to learn something. You haven't totally rejected the Lord, but just take your attention off of Jesus and get to looking at things through the natural realm. And you know what? You'll begin to sink. This talks about that you have to keep your attention focused on Jesus, the author and the finisher of your faith. Consider Him. The word consider means to study, ponder, deliberate, examine, focus upon, meditate upon. All of those are words that consider means. Consider Him that endured such contradiction of sinners against Himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your mind. I can say this, that if you're weary, if you feel like fainting, if you're just about out of gas and you're ready to quit and give up, or just, you know, you hadn't even got a goal now of finishing your race, you just want to survive and live through this, it's because you haven't considered Jesus. That's the reason that you're weary and fainting in your mind. There is no other reason. Somebody said, but you don't know what this person did. Look, all of us have had problems. I've had things come against me. Everybody has things come against them, but some people are able to continue on and cross the finish line and finish. I'm not saying that you don't have problems. I'm not saying that people haven't treated you badly, but if your attention is on the Lord, you can make it. You know, I just saw a friend that I hadn't seen in a long time came up to me in school yesterday, and they said something to me. I said, "How are you doing? How are things going with you and your husband?" And she says, "Well, we got a divorce." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, what happened?" And she said, "Well, after 40-something years of marriage, he decided he was a woman. And so now he's got long red hair and he wears dresses and stuff." And anyway, that's terrible. And she had problems with one of her children and on, and she had all of these terrible things. Most people would crumple. But you know what? She was still praising the Lord. And she says, "I'm fine. God's taking care of me." She says, "It's been hard." She says, "I've had some problems." But she was still on track. And she was still glorifying God. You know why? Because she's looking at Jesus, the author and the finisher of her faith. Most people would have crumbled under things like that. Most people just quit. I'm telling you, it's not what's happening to you outside. It's not your circumstances. It's not your mate. It's not your children. It's not your job. It's not the government. It's not what your neighbors are doing. It's not what all of this stuff is. You can be supernaturally energized and empowered by God if you just wait upon the Lord. If your attention is focused upon Him. And this is what you've got to do. If you want to finish strong, you've got to keep your attention focused on the Lord. Look at this in Philippians chapter 3. This is the Apostle Paul talking. And he says, not in verse 12, "Not as though I had already attained to either were already perfect, but I follow after, if that I may apprehend that for which I also am apprehended of Christ. Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press towards the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus." So here he is talking about, I haven't attained, but I'm headed in this direction. I'm moving towards this mark. I'm pressing towards it. And how do I do it? I forget everything else. And this one thing I do. You get to where you're focused on God and you are tied into God and you go out of your way to fellowship with God and spend time with Him, and you turn off other things and turn on the Lord, and you keep your attention on Jesus, the author and the finisher of your faith, and you will not be weary. You won't faint in your mind. You will be able to fulfill God's will for you. This is really simple. But again, it's things that people miss. The reason Paul finished strong was because he did one thing. He was single-minded. He was focused on God. If you want to kill a person's vision, all you got to do is give them two, and that'll destroy them every time. You got to focus on God.